working on the MADlib project, what we're going to do first is connect the input fields, which are in the HTML. So we're going to collect these input fields, which are gathering text, and string them up so that when you click the submit button, it is going to write the story. Once we have that working, then we'll start adding in some of the other niceties, things we're going to be looking at doing, controlling focus and blur, of which is the active form field, changing our cursor to a different shape, and checking the input that the user provides. We'll be looking for empty inputs, and if so, prompt them to fill in the form completely. And finally, we will look at resetting the form so that when you hit try again, it starts fresh and you can work on it once more. So first, what I'm going to do is take a look. So we have the input panel, which has these 3 input IDs, and then the button for submit, and it'll write it to the output panel where we have your story, and it's going to write it into this paragraph, which currently has the word junk in its place. And if I look at the page over here, when the page renders, we will see it says junk. So what we want to do is replace junk with the story. So I'll be able to fill it in, hit submit, and junk will disappear and be replaced with the appropriate and correct text. To do that, we will see that we are using Query Selector to gain access to the input and output panel. We're getting access to those elements of name, color, and place. We're gaining access to the story, so that we're in pretty good shape at the moment. The submit button has an event listener attached to it. The event is click, and it will then run the function write story. So if I click on the submit button, it will then call the function write story. So we have some of it already wired up. We just need to figure out how to do it. So the big one we're really looking at is this write story, because I have access to my input fields. I want to then put their information together using write story so that it will then replace the story, which is this paragraph here, with the correct text. Now, looking down, we will see write story is in place, and it's waiting for me to grab those inputs and put them into the function. To accomplish that, what I'm going to do is create a variable. I'll call it let finished story be equal to an empty string. So this is now going to be the empty string that is going to then populate my the story paragraph. So we'll start out and just create an empty string to begin the process. With finished story set up as a variable, the next thing we're going to do is start populating it. We populate it by grabbing the values from the input fields that we have. So we start out with finished story plus equals. So we're adding to what was there, and now I can write the text that I want to write. So I can say welcome, put a space, and now add a plus, and then the first input is first name. I'll grab the value of that, and then I will finish up with a period. Now, one thing we want to do when we're writing this out is, this is a relatively short line of text plus a variable value or a input value. And if we get really long, so we could write it all in one shot, but experience has demonstrated that if we try to do too much in one single push, invariably things start to break down. So it's easier to do it in a series of steps that are smaller and use the plus equal, so we just keep adding to it. So now again, we're working on so I'll grab that next value. I'll grab the favorite color value. Say color. And finally, I'll grab the last value. And put that in. Notice I'm putting spaces in either at the end of a sentence or at before or after the pluses so that we have correct spacing between words. And with this in here under Write Story, now what I can do is I can save this and let's see how this looks, because currently when I press the button, we are going to, under Submit, it's going to call Write Story. Write Story updates this. Oh, final thing that we need to do is we need to then populate. So we'll grab the story, and the first method we will look at is just changing the inner HTML of that. So we're changing the contents of that element to finish story. So now I can save that, jump over to Chrome, and I am running with Atom Live Server, so we can see that it's automatically updating every time I do it. Now I did modify the warning so that I changed the style so it's red, so we know that's there, so it's easy to see that that is happening. Now we'll just cycle through. And if I click the Submit button, let's see what happens here. We can see that it now puts it all in. So the text is working. So that's a good first step. We've proven it works and that we can make it work. Now, if your story is more complex, if you have multiple paragraphs and other things going on, we're going to have to approach this a little bit different. But we'll come back to that once we get some of the other features added into the project, because we want to just do it in different steps. So I want to update the inner HTML, and when I do this, we're going to go back and just take a look for a moment and see what's happening with it. And it's a good idea to pull up the console while we're looking. So look at the elements, scroll down. Here's the output panel, and we can see there is, under my story, there is the text. That text is showing up inside this paragraph. So we can see there is a bunch of text happening inside that paragraph. So it's a good idea to pull up the console while we're looking. I'm clicking over to Elements so I can actually see what is happening. So if I look at the output panel, there it is. We can see it starts out, the word junk is there. And now if I put something in, and click the button, see there's the text, it shows up. If I look at my story, there's the text and it shows up and it's inside that paragraph. What we're going to be looking at shortly is how I can create multiple paragraphs and work with that. And we can do that using innerHTML, and that works pretty good. But there are other ways that we will want to work with it that are more recommended. The next thing I want to do is to modify the key to find out that I've pressed the Enter key. To find out if we have indeed pressed the Enter key, we will use an if statement. In that if statement, I will look for the key code of the event. So when I press a key, we're looking for that key event. So we're going to check if the key code, every key on our keyboard has a code associated with it. It's a numeric code. The Enter key happens to have a numeric code of 13. And the reason I want to do this in this manner, and we should put that in here as well. So if I press any key, we don't want it to say Enter. We only want it to log out the Enter key was pressed when it is indeed the, when it does indeed have the key code of 13. So if you want to know other key codes, you look up ASCII key codes, and you can go find all of these whole charts online for every key on your keyboard, and we can get the information about it that way. So if I press the Enter key, then it will call the function writeStory, which is the same function that is indeed being called when I click on the Submit button. So this allows me, especially when I'm testing my project, I don't have to then take my hand off the keyboard. So I can type some stuff in, and then I can just hit the Enter key, and we see it now gives me the result in my story. So it's an easy way to work. It's a nicety for when we're doing something that may involve a keyboard as part of the process. So looking at our options here, we can see that we're entering the text, we're using the Enter key. Want to go ahead and start modifying what fields we see right away in our documents and setting their different class names appropriately. So to do that, so now the next thing I need to do is to modify what I'm seeing. So I want to take the input panel, the output panel, and warning and verify their class names. So I'm just going to start input panel dot class name is going to be equal to display block, guaranteeing that we see it. Now it already is display block by default, but if I do it this way, it's just easier to modify when we're going to be changing, is to always set all three every time. So now if we set the output panel's class name equal to display none, and the warning is going to, oh, wrong warning. Class name is going to be set to display none. So I can save this back here, and we can see now we only see our form field, so that's working well. So I'm going to copy that, and then under writeStory, I'm going to then modify it. So we'll tell the input panel to be none, and display block and display block, or the warning is not going to be, sorry, that won't be display block yet. That's going to be under display none because we're writing the story. We will display the warning display block on that if the user has incorrectly filled in the form, and that's where we'll have to be checking for that. So we'll just leave this here for now. We'll probably move it later. Now, if I put some stuff in, submit my answer, you can see that happen. Now, when I hit again, nothing is happening. So let's take a look up in the code here. So again, is going to call reset page. So under reset page, with that, we're going to go back and grab, which actually there, display the input, hide the output, hide the warning. We also are going to need to take the story, and we'll set its inner HTML equal to nothing, so that now clears that out. So that guarantees when we go back to the panel later, and it's less of an issue now, but when we start changing around some of the other ways that we populate it and stop using innerHTML, but some other techniques, we will want this here. Otherwise, if we don't have it, we'll be like, whoa, we're getting double and triple stories occurring in our project. So if I look here, let's try this out. Put in something, 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 hit return. It's there, click again. And we can see it's close, but I think we want to clear out the form field so we can start over with what's there. So what we can do with that to clear those out, now we have our first name, and we're going to modify its value. and we modify its value to be an empty string. That clears it out. So first name, your favorite color, will be set equal to an empty string. And finally, my place is value will be set to an empty string as well. So now if I run this, turn, there's the story, and click again, and you can see they're now cleared out. So the form looks pretty good. So we've made some pretty good progress here. We're clearing out the form. We're allowing it to reset. What we now need to work on doing is changing around focus and blur, and then finally we will work on checking to make sure the user has filled out the form, and then finally look at some other methods on how we can write the story. Adding in the focus, when we set that up, we'll set first name, and we'll put the focus on that. So that now automatically makes that item that is being focused on when our document loads. We also then, under reset, we turn the focus back to first name so that we have now set the focus back on the document. With our buttons, what we will want to do is to set their style, cursor equal to pointer. Now we're doing this through JavaScript. We could also set this up through CSS as an option as well. Both are valid. And you can determine what method you want to use in your project, because submit and again are both buttons, so we could set that as a generic button option that it's setting the style. So that would be something we could look at. Now if we look at the page here, we'll see how the cursor now changes when you roll over the button. So this is something that works with pointing devices. Of course, it's not going to work in a touch environment. Next thing that we're going to do is verify if the user has filled in all of the input fields. So to understand that, we're going to just go through and do a basic check, but we're not even going to worry about checking the form fields yet. We'll add that in momentarily. With that, what we can do is write it out with a simple if, and we can go if check complete. So we're going to call the check complete function. So we want to call that function and find out what it's returning, because we're going to set it up to return a value. So if check complete returns a false value, so if we say if check complete, the function check complete returns a false value, at that point what we want to do is exit this whole write story. Now currently check complete, the function we can see here, doesn't do anything yet. But we can set it up so that we can say return false. So if it returns a false value. Now without putting anything after the return, if we have it on an if statement, then this return is going to, if we had run into it, this function is going to exit. But it's not going to return anything, it will just exit. So in some ways, this use of return here is the same as saying exit. In this case, we're using return and we're going to return a value. So a function can return a value, or we can just exit that function. So when we encounter the statement return, we're saying exit this function and give us a value. In this case, the value is false. So if I call check complete and that returns a value of false, we're not going to write out my story. So we can see that. I'll save this, jump over to my project, and now I notice we still have the cursor changing to a hand. I can click that button and nothing happened because we exited. So we didn't write the story, we didn't change the displays of our different elements. Now under check complete, I'm going to say warning. Oh, let's try again. So warning class name, we'll set it equal to display block. So that will make it show up. So now if we go back here and hit our button, we'll see that it now pulls that up and says, please answer all of the questions. So that's a good first step, but it's making it false no matter what. What we want to say instead is if, and this is where we're going to go through first name dot value is equal to empty string, and fav color dot value is equal to empty string, and place dot value is equal to empty string. Then we will want to return false. Else return true. So we want our function to either return false or return true. That makes the most sense. So we only make this show up if all three are empty. So this now assumes we've filled in nothing with it. So now this would be a quick way. We're going to still have to rewrite this because it's not really giving us the full result we want, but we can cycle through it. So we can save this, go here. Now if I submit, all three were empty. Now if I put something here and submit, it wrote a story, but just with that first one. So we can see that it's close, but it's not quite all there. So this is probably not the best way to go about writing it. So if first name's value is equal to that, then we want this to happen. So now I'll just cut that out of there, put this here. And we can do this with a series of if, else if statements, but I can also do it as just a series of if statements as well. So I could do else if favorite color, like that, else if place, like that. And now paste that in there, paste this in here. So we can see if that's empty, set it. Else if this is empty, set it. Else if. So it's working. This gives us a result. It's not giving us a really detailed feedback on message of how to go about checking it, but at least it's giving us feedback that it will pull up the option and say fill in all values or whatever that said. So now if I, first we go save it. Now I'll go over here. So if I enter in name there and then return, it's not working. Enter in a name and a place, it's still there. Enter in a name and a place, and or name and a color in a place, then it works. So we can see that that's working. Our other functionality is still there, so it's still behaving correctly as part of it. if we end up with too many form fields, this could become unwieldy. It's not necessarily going to be an ideal way of working with it, but it certainly is a way that we can make it work so far. And we can see that then there was very little work we had to do to write story. We just do a quick check, and if the quick check comes out false, it won't run the rest of this code, but if it comes out true, then it runs the rest of it. So that part behaves really nice. It's just this isn't the prettiest way that we could go about doing this. What we might want, if we want to provide feedback to the user, we could put information in that they need to fill in a form field as part of it. So we could set it up so that you could modify the text that's occurring inside that. Now if we go back and look in the warning, we can see it's a paragraph. So we can set the inner HTML of this paragraph to be something different. Now while I look at what is happening here, the warning.inner HTML, we can say be equal to. And now the problem with this, and we'll quickly understand why this is probably not the ideal way of doing it, is please enter a name. And we might as well just reuse. So what we will see, if I do it this way, if I go here and if I enter in a name, skip my color, enter in a place, and enter, it says please enter a color. Okay, that makes sense. If I don't have a name, it says please enter a name. So we now have a name, a color, no place. It says please enter a place. Now if I skip name and place, it says please enter a name. I also didn't do place. So we could have it in this case where it's selecting one at a time. So it's starting from the top of the form. And we've certainly encountered different form fields online where it tells us what form elements that we're supposed to be filling in, which ones that we need to change or replace. So this would indicate that using this warning, we might want to go about and figure out a different solution to do this. And there are ways that we could store in an array. We could store all the items that haven't been entered and then update the inner HTML once for warning with all of the form fields that the user does need to fill out. I could use an array as part of it to give us that information, but instead of changing the warning message, I'm going to leave the warning message as is. I still want it to show up when the user does fail to enter something, but I want to give some visual feedback so they know which form fields to fill in. So to that end, what I'm going to do is create a background color. So I'm going to create a class BG Pink. And this will create a pink background color that can fill my form fields when the user fails to input correctly. So instead of changing that, we will say first name dot class name is going to be equal to BG Pink. And we'll repeat that process for the other form fields. And this will be for place. This will be for my fave color. So that sets their values to pink. And when I do that, now, if I go over here and look at this, so if I type in the first name, second name, hit place, we can see how now it ending, please answer all questions. And now it's asking me to fix that. Now I submit my answer, go back. Problem is it's staying pink. So we need to clear the pinks out of there. Now, as I go about doing this and want to check it, so we can see here, so if this is now set up so it's filling it with pink, what we can do is go down under my reset, and the format for doing this would be first name dot class list dot remove, and with this would be bg pink. So that now removes it in case it was there. And if it's not there, it's not going to cause us trouble. So if I go here, submit answers, we can see it's now wanting in color. But we can see our if statement is exiting a little bit early. So if I were to put this in and now submit, now that is pink. Go here, submit, go back. We can see now they're back to not being pink. But you can see that place hasn't been answered. So it's not a complete solution yet, but it's getting us much closer to figuring out how to answer these things. Better break this down so that it fixes and runs through everything. What I want to do is to, at the start of checking, set all of my form fields back to no pink background. So I'm going to copy that. Now we're using the class list property, which has an add and remove option. We could also be using toggle as another option that we could put on there, and there's a way we could work with toggle. I just find that the add and remove makes a little bit more sense, or we're setting the class name. So instead of just declaring the class name, we could use the class list add option as well. But I'm now going to remove any pink values that I had. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these returns here. So it's only going to do a return at the very end, and that will make more sense in a moment. Get rid of that. We're going to get rid of, we'll just set these up as all separate entities, because we'll just let each form field be its own thing. So if that value is set up, and so if the first value is empty, sets the first name pink, second one. So now we'll do any of them. And then finally we can say if, and what we're going to do is if any one of these is empty, so if first name value is equal to empty string, or using the double pipes as our or concatenator, so or favorite color dot value is equal to an empty string, or again with the double pipe, which is right below the delete key, above the return key on the keyboard, places value is equal to empty string. So if any one of those is true, at that point, we set warnings, class name equal to display block, and return false. Else return true. So with this, it removes any pink that's there. Then if the first one is empty, it fills with pink at the second. So this way, if all three are pink, or if one is pink, the first and third, this should allow it to work in all cases. So if all three are empty, all three turn pink. If I put in a name and submit, changed it. If I put in a place, submit, change it. Now if I go back and get rid of a name, add in a color, let's see. So we can see it's now working its way correctly through our options. Go back to again. There we go, good to go. So now we've made big progress. Our check complete gives us visual feedback to the user. It's a nice way of working with it. Doesn't require us to get too advanced on other control structures like arrays and other things. We are using a conditional where we're checking for multiple items and then returning something, but again, a simple if-else. Otherwise, we have our three ifs. By not tying them in if-else, so if, else if, else if, that allows each one to operate independently, so it doesn't automatically kick it out after the first one. So that provides a little bit better logic. This is a little bit redundant in code because I'm repeating those same three lines in a different place, so I probably should wrap that as just a standalone function that I can call, but we'll worry about that optimization at a future date. The next item that we need to look at is how to write out a more complex story that may involve more than one paragraph and how we're able to pull that off. To be able to handle multiple paragraphs, as well as to use what would be a better way of working, is to not use the innerHTML with form input. One of the problems of using innerHTML with the form input is if someone were to fill in actual JavaScript into the form fields while they are doing it, that JavaScript can run. So this is how you could actually insert malicious, dangerous JavaScript code into a form if someone is looking for innerHTML as their option. So to demonstrate how this works, when we look at our form field as it's running, now if I put something in here, so if I just put something in each of my form fields, it didn't register the first time. Now we can see it all goes on one line. So if I do it again this time, if I go John, and now if I were to insert an actual HTML line break like this, and then red, and if we did a couple of these line breaks and something else, we'll see that it now puts it onto multiple lines. So we can see it did a line break there, it did a line break as well as an empty line after that. So it's inserting the actual HTML code. If I can insert HTML code, I can insert a script. I can insert something that is dangerous and malicious that could potentially infect the computer. So using innerHTML to process form input is probably not going to be our best way of going about doing it. So what we instead want to do is to use text nodes. So we actually are going to create text nodes. We'll use JavaScript to create elements of our page, and then we will add these to it. So instead of adding in right here with the finished story, I'm going to work this now a little bit differently. So I'm just going to leave that there for the moment, and then I will be commenting this out as we work with it. So I'm going to first create the text that I want to put into each paragraph, and I will just create a constant. I'm going to call this story text 1 is equal to, and in this case it's going to be equal to the content from my first form with there like that. Now we'll create a second one, and we'll say story text 2, and then I will also have story text 3. Now as I do that, let's just go get these and put these in. So now I've created those 3 values. In the meantime, we can now comment all that out because I'm done with that for the moment. So I've created the story values. Now I need to create my new paragraphs. So I'll just call it new paragraph 1 is going to be equal to document.createElement. And the element I'm creating is a paragraph. Now, with that, we can copy and paste that in for paragraph 2 and paragraph 3, not 4, 3. So first, we're going to create these paragraphs. Then we have to create our text nodes. And our new text nodes will be document create text node, because the paragraph is the HTML element. Then we have to create the text node that's going to contain the text that we put into it, and we then populate that with the story text element. So I'm putting that text into, so this text I've created into this text node, which is new text 1. And then we'll have for 2 and then for 3. Now, so we've created our elements, we've created our text nodes. Now we have to add that text node to our paragraph. So our paragraph, we say new text or append child, and then it will be our new text, like that. So the paragraph, we are adding the text node to that paragraph. Then finally, what we'll have to do is add that paragraph to our story element. So our story element, when we look up here, if I go into the HTML, we have the story. So we're going to have to modify this a little bit because we'll see how that's not going to work quite right anymore once we follow this workflow. So copy, paste, paste, paste. And then those will be in B2. And I'm command selecting multiple things so I can just type once. So now we've added that. Now it's the story dot append child new paragraph 1. And then paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. So we can see this is highly repetitive code, which tells us we probably have a way or a method that we could refactor it into more efficient code. But for the time being, this is going to suffice. So this is going to get us pretty close to the process. Now, if I put some text in and some more text and return, we can see that it now populates those. We will also notice that the word junk is there, which it wasn't there before. When we used the story innerHTML, it replaces whatever HTML text was in that paragraph with the new text. So if I go back up into my document and look, I will see in my document it says junk. So if I just get rid of that, now let's see what happens when we run this. So we have the story. And now I'll put some stuff in here. Submit it. We'll see, OK, now looks pretty good. Now let's just take a look here and see what's happening. And we'll see this story, wait. OK, so I have, the story was set up originally as a paragraph. And now I've just added 3 paragraphs to a paragraph. So normally we don't want to have a paragraph inside a paragraph. So we probably want to modify this so it's no longer a paragraph. But if it's going to be containing multiple elements within it, it might make more sense for it to be a section. Or a div. So I could set it up as a div, but it's I'm going to use a section because it seems to make sense. It could be a section because it's a portion of our page that's going to contain multiple items. So I will just call it a section, and within that section I'll be putting in multiple paragraphs. Now, I look here, go into my output panel here, there's the story, it's a section. Now if I put some stuff in and return, we'll see that within that section we now have paragraphs. That is better HTML markup, which is a redundant statement in and of itself because HTML is markup, but it is much better markup by turning that from a paragraph to a section, and then within it we are creating our different paragraphs of text, and each one of these could have multiple. If you had 20 form fields, you could have a couple form fields making up each paragraph, but then we're breaking those paragraphs up into pieces so then we can add them to our document. So we can have more control over our story so we don't get one long run-on paragraph where it's sentence after sentence after sentence, and that would just be kind of junky looking. This gives us some more options as part of what we're doing. We also would have an option, if we want, is we could now figure out how to start adding in additional text into it, and then we could even look at potentially doing some additional style work, but this gets us off to a good start. And really the only final thing that we need to do to this project is to refactor it a little bit so we don't have the repetitive or duplicative code like we have here, or where we're repeating things like the removing of the background. We might want to explore using toggle. So there's some other options that we could do, but for now we've created something that is relatively solid and has complete functionality to it without too many outline use cases that are going to break it. And I can also prove now using these text nodes that if I were to put in something like that and run it, we can see that it now renders that markup as text, not as markup, so it doesn't have the security issue that we were looking at before. All in all, we have created a functional project.